Well, greetings, everyone. I must admit, after a lot of the conversations that we've been listening to, and in particular, Christiana Figueres talk about, I guess, our future, but just the magnetism of the person. And I think that's what it comes down to. It comes down to people. You know, there are huge issues, and we heard a lot about those issues, but it's the people that can make the difference. And when you've got people who can lead, someone like Christiana, I kind of feel a little bit of burden has been lifted, and you realize that what you've got to do is to make a difference yourself. But I didn't want to talk about the rather brilliant expertise of a lot of the people who have been laureates of the Hillary Institute. I wanted to scroll it back a little bit and talk a little bit about, I guess, the man who inspired the Institute in the first instance. And if I think about if my father was here tonight, I think I know he'd be quietly chuffed that his legacy of helping the people of the Mount Everest region continues to this day, and that some important ventures, such as the Hillary Institute and its work, carry on with his name. Now, I know he'd be proud of what the Hillary Institute has achieved with the Laureate program. I mean, who wouldn't be, having just listened to Christiana there? What an imposing and what an impressive and extraordinary person. And frankly, look how an institute like this and a laureate like that brings in people like yourselves to attend an event like this. That speaks volumes. It really does. The important thing, of course, is to have leadership, and she obviously has demonstrated that in humanitarian and environmental programs. And I'm also very impressed by the Hillary Institute's work with their immigration program to bring entrepreneurs to New Zealand to generate new business and achieve new outcomes. I think this continued proactivity of the Hillary Institute and the people who make the Institute what it is a lasting testament to the legacy of the man. And I have to say, as his son and on behalf of the Hillary family, we feel deeply honored that it is in his name. So what are the keys to that legacy? You know, for my father, he did like to see, he couldn't stand seeing someone who was sort of languid and without energy. He liked enthusiasm, tons of energy, talent, teamwork, but it was important there was camaraderie and fun. And he felt it was important there was a combined passion for the task at hand, whether it was climbing a mountain, going on a big expedition somewhere, building a small school or a medical clinic up there in the Himalayas. It really didn't matter. He wanted to see that energy and dedication at the task at hand. I've got to say, growing up in the Hillary family, we did joke that adventure was compulsory. There was nothing optional about it. And the anxiety myself and my two sisters felt as each school holiday would come around, we would wonder, where on earth would he take us next? And I must admit, it was a pretty amazing series of experiences. But I think trekking together in Nepal was probably one of the best of them. My father, my mother Louise, my sisters Sarah and Belinda, all five of us heading off into the hills, helping with his commitment, or to their commitment, to the people of the Himalayas, building 42 schools and hospitals, airfields, water systems, bridges over gorges and cataracts, helping establish, along with the New Zealand Department of Conservation, Sagarmatha, or Mount Everest National Park, up there on the northern border of Nepal, and reforestation programs. You know, I remember Dad telling us about his climb on Mount Everest when we were really small kids. And you can imagine, you're sitting around a table like this, and you're a small boy or a small girl, and you're looking up at this big, craggy-faced man. And, you know, probably the reason he starts talking about it is that, maybe some famous climber from Europe is visiting or whatever. And we're sitting there and out come these stories. And Dad actually telling us about that last part of the climb, moving up to the summit, and saying that as they got up towards the top of the south summit, so the subsidiary summit, the snow and ice conditions were very unstable. And he said he started to have doubts whether or not the climb was going to be possible. And of course we kids are going, doubts? Dad? You? And he's going, great blades of ice and snow were breaking off and shooting down the face, a 4-kilometer high face, into Tibet. And he's looking down at Tenzing, and Tenzing's looking nervously up to him, he said. And then he said, suddenly this little voice that we all have, that little bit of self-talk, sort of came into his mind. And he said it went something like this: Ed, my boy, this is Everest. Sometimes you've got to be prepared to go the extra distance and push a little harder. And we're going, yes, that's the spirit, Dad. So you see, if you're ever finding yourself in need of a little positive self-talk and encouragement, just repeat, Ed, my boy, this is Everest. And I think really we are facing one of those now, probably a lot bigger than that. But being the first to climb Everest attracted some questions at the time. So, growing up in the Hillary household, the phone would ring, journalists would call in with different questions. But there was a periodic question that seemed to have a life of about 10 years. Every 10 years, some young journalist in some corner of the globe would discover, and it's quite incorrect, I might add, that there seemed to be evidence that K2 in Pakistan, the world's second highest mountain, was perhaps the highest mountain after all. So who better to call than Ed Hillary, the first man to climb Mount Everest? And I remember on one of these occasions, the phone would ring and Dad answered the phone, and the journalist explained that he'd just come across evidence to say that K2 was the highest mountain in the world. And I've got to hand it to Dad. He really was a master at deflecting what I would describe as slightly inflammatory questions and making light of preposterous propositions. And how he answered, the journalist goes, how does it feel, Sir Edmund, after all these years we've just discovered that Everest is just the second highest mountain in the world? To which Dad replied, oh, well, I've had 40 good years out of it. I thought it was a brilliant response. I mean, it was sort of self-deprecating in its nature, but it was also kind of a fundamental of never take the bastards too seriously. And I have to say, we sure laughed about that one. In my father's autobiography, Nothing Ventured, Nothing Won, he wrote, each of us has to discover his own path, of that I am sure. Some paths will be spectacular and others peaceful and quiet. Who is to say which is the most important? For me, the most rewarding moments have not always been the great moments, for what can surpass a tear on your departure, joy on your return, or a trusting hand in yours? There were many dimensions to Ed Hillary, and that really was his strength. He was a master of reinventing himself, building committed teams and strong relationships, and most importantly, I think, friendships. In 1990, I made my first climb to the summit of Mount Everest. And you spent 3 months acclimatizing, going up, coming down, going up, coming down, and eventually that summit night comes. And it is night. You climb all night and you arrive up there at dawn. And in 1990, it was the beginning of satellite technology. Not that we could carry the satellite phone because it weighed 90 kilograms and it didn't have a power source. So that stayed at base camp. But we had a walkie-talkie patched into this satellite phone down at base camp, and I'm standing up there and the sun's coming up in the east, and you're in this quite euphoric, amazing location looking out over the Tibetan plateau and back down into the foothills of Nepal towards India. And the first call I got on the phone was an Australian journalist. And he said, "Peter, I know where you are," which I thought was pretty good for a journalist. And he went on and said, "Look, I just have one question for you. It is, how does it feel to follow in your father's footsteps?" Now, you've got to understand that I'm deeply hypoxic. I'm at 8,800 meters, 29,000 feet. I'm exhausted, and I'm looking around, and I'm looking for some sort of inspiring thing to say to this question, and I'm looking out over Tibet. And then, to my utter amazement, something did occur to me. And I grabbed the walkie-talkie, pulled it up to my face, and I said, "I've had a thoroughly good look around up here, but I can't see Dad's footprints anywhere." But the reality is, those symbolic footprints are still out there, not just on the summit of Mount Everest or the dusty footpaths of Solukhumbu district in Nepal, nor in the minds of people around New Zealand or around the world. Following Ed Hillary's footprints are a lasting inspiration for us all to try harder, go further, be more generous. We've heard the term generous used a fair bit tonight, and that is so important because generosity of spirit is the greatest legacy, and that's part of the legacy we need to leave to future generations. And that is what we have been here to celebrate tonight. The Hillary Institute Laureate for 2020, Christiana Figueres, and her work for the climate crisis, the immense challenges it presents to humanity. Wasn't that a remarkable address by Christiana? And yet, despite the gravity of what she's talking about, the future of our planet, the future of our country, the future of our communities, she had that delightful lightness, a warmth. And I think that complexity of presentation and communication is something we can take away from. And I'd really like to say a rousing applause maybe again for Christiana, the Hillary Institute Laureate for 2020. What an extraordinary person, and how honoured are we to have her. But finally, I'd just like to thank all of you. It is an honour for the Hillary family to be associated with this organisation in our Father's name, and the amazing people who are part of this organisation, who don't just run it, but the laureates, the fellows, everyone involved. It's a very inspiring thing, and we look forward to a continued association with the organisation and making whatever contributions we can. So thank you very much. I guess particularly to Anarchy and to Mark, who've been my main contacts over the last decade or so. So thank you.